Welcome back to Where in the World, where we have real conversations with young professionals about life and career, all while attempting to guess where in the world they are. We'll learn something new about our guests and what it's like to forge your own career path as a young professional. And when we say young, we're really talking about a state of mind. You'll learn by watching this web series that your career will take many dips and turns over time. And just when you think you've made it, you might have to scrap it all and start from scratch. Sometimes that's just the way it goes. We ride the tide. I'm your host, Clary Johnson, and I'm joined here today by Omari Harebin, who's a marketing strategist and founder at SQSP Themes, also known as SquarespaceThemes.com. The big, hairy question we're asking today is how can young professionals use their imaginations to invent their dream careers? But before we jump in, let's do some housekeeping. This is a mini web series game show. The questions will range from standard interview like questions to more personal questions about our guests' careers. You'll notice we're both here today with different backgrounds. In between questions, we'll each have an opportunity to guess where in the world the other person is. The first person to guess correctly wins. Our guests can also join along by asking for clues along the way. And our audience also can help out by asking for clues as well. So please join me in welcoming Omari.
Hey.
Hey, welcome. So, Omari, thank you for joining us on the show today. We met through a mutual connection and quickly found out that we share a few things in common. We're both entrepreneurs, we enjoy creating things. And prior to the show, we talked about your background as a mechanical engineer, and I was inspired by your personal process for inventing the future and reality that you want for your life. So, we're going to dive into that a little bit more on the show today. But first, let's get started with our most common interview question. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hey, thank you for that wonderful intro, Clary. My name is Omari Harebin, and I'm a husband and father of three. I call myself a life school dad. Um, I kind of do a homeschool thing. I'm a digital marketing strategist. And I kind of got here not intentionally, but out of necessity and a desire to create a certain kind of lifestyle for myself and my family.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit more about yourself and as a marketing strategist, we find our ways, our paths in so many different ways, and a lot of times it's not always necessarily intentional. I remember times in my life when I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, or who I wanted to be when I grew up, but I felt all of this pressure from whether it was my family or whether it was the adults in my life or teachers to kind of know where I was going to be and who I was going to be and what I was going to do. And I quickly found out that. Sometimes you just have to ride the tide. Sometimes you don't always know what that guiding light is. And so I've just really enjoyed living a life of adventure and kind of figuring things out as I go along and being led in really cool directions. And so I'm excited to learn more about your career path as well. But before we ask that question, I want to guess where in the world you are. So, um, freedom and
Mhm.
justice. Okay, that's what I see. So, for people who've seen this show before, we are not a podcast yet, but I always like to try to describe what I'm seeing for our potential podcast listeners in the future. So, here's what I'm seeing. I am seeing some beautiful palm trees, and it's a beautiful, beautiful blue sky. But what's taking up most of the frame behind Omari, guys, a it almost looks like a temple, or a crypt, or it looks like um, kind of like some kind of a structure that is in honor of um like how do I describe this? Think of the White House, but not as big, not as white. It has a few pillars behind it. I can definitely see at least two pillars. There's a star at the top, and there's a date 1957. And then at
Mm.
the top it says freedom and justice. So, um, this looks like a monument of some sort. And I see palm trees. So that means that we're in some kind of a tropical place. I'm going to guess that you are in Florida.
No, sorry. Next question.
Actually, it's funny that you're doing the sound effects because we actually have sound effects for the show.
Oh, here he goes. Okay. All right. I'm in the right place.
Yes, you are.
I just don't have it for myself.
All right. Well, I lose. Can you give me a clue about this place? Tell me something about it.
I think that date is a good clue, right? 1850. I mean, not 18, 1957.
Okay.
And a monument. I think those are two really solid clues.
Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling like even though my answer felt maybe far off, I still feel like I'm close to
Yeah, yeah,
guessing what
yeah,
this
yeah,
place is.
yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, it's your turn.
Okay. So my very first, I saw the lighthouse. I'm thinking, um, like Long Island.
Okay.
Uh, maybe like, Nantucket.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, not quite. Not
Okay.
quite Long Island or Nantucket. But you're right in saying that there is a lighthouse in the back. So I am, sitting on a sea. There is a lighthouse in the back. Would you like to describe what the lighthouse actually looks
Yeah,
like?
so the lighthouse is, uh
Oh, sorry.
yeah, there you go. It is it is white and with like a black base, and it looks like it's in the middle of the sea. Which I don't think I've seen that before. And there are three like little windows on it. So
Yeah,
I think we're gonna figure this one out. I think
yeah,
we're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
get it. Yeah.
So what's cool about this lighthouse is that it's the oldest surviving sea wash lighthouse in the whole world.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's move on to our next question. So, you told us a little bit about who you are, what you do today. Give us a background about how you got there. Take us through the
Yeah.
journey of your career.
Um. So I forgot where I was. Oh, I was reading this in the notes for the show. I was reading about my my childhood recently, and when I was 10, I went to the library with my mom, and my son is 10 now, and he goes to the library with his mom. So it's kind of like when I read that, I was like, oh, okay, kind of familiar with that. And I remember looking up mechanical engineer because I knew I was very mechanically inclined. I like to put things together and build things and design. And so the internet was a brand new thing at the time. And so I went to search the internet to find a definition or find more about what this career that I envisioned for myself would look like. And I printed out the definition, and it had things like, design in automobiles, and engineers are responsible for creating systems, and all sorts of things that felt really creative and inventive. And I wanted to be a creative inventor of some kind, and that seemed like the path forward for me. And so I printed that out and had it up in my room in fifth grade, and then I remember, you know, going through middle school. Adults would ask, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was playing with different answers, and it was all around some sort of prestige. And I remember there was a period around seventh grade and eighth grade where I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to go to Harvard Law. And then there was a period right when I started high school when I really started getting into websites, and being able to create websites. And I was really fascinated with that. And around that time, my mom asked, she said, "Okay, so what are you thinking about doing?" I was getting those college letters in the mail after you take your PSATs, and I was like, I want to do web design. And my mom's an educator, and so um, from her vantage point, like that just wasn't a thing to go to school for and study. I mean, the internet was just a few years old. Like, what is this career of web design? And so I kind of discarded the idea, but I didn't let go of just the passion for creating things online. And so I went to school for mechanical engineering, like the 10-year-old decided. And during school, though, I was this by this time I was really into music and making beats. And so I would use my web design skills to create websites for my instrumental beat selling pages. And I kind of just kept this web design thing on the side for whenever I needed to execute on something creative that I wanted to present online. And that took me all the way through grad school, but I never did it for money. I never knew really how to make money with that particular skill set until about 10 years ago when my son was about to be born. And by this time, I'm working professionally as an engineer. I was in a leadership development program where I was rotating through these different somewhat engineering roles. So I was doing project management, data performance, all these different kind of things to give me leadership experience and preparation. And my son was on the way, and but I also had a case, a legal case. Well, I got arrested. I don't talk about it much, so whenever I bring it up, it's always like, "Well, what words do you use again?" So I got arrested, and so I had a child and a trial on the way at the same time. And in that state of uncertainty and not quite knowing what I was going to do, I remember I wrote down on a piece of paper how money I gonna make. And that's just a Jamaican colloquialism for how am I gonna make money. And on that, I had photography. I was doing a little photography on the side, videography. I was doing that on the side. And at the bottom of the list, I had web design, and I'd never done it for anyone, other than myself. But it was like a last call kind of a thing. Like if all else fails, maybe I can make a website for someone. And so when my child was born, I had the trial and child, and I went on paternity leave and decided that I wasn't going to go back to work. It just didn't make sense for my circumstances. And so now I had to figure out some kind of remote way to make money. And Squarespace was the web design platform that I was familiar with and using for myself. And even though I couldn't imagine why someone would want to pay me for a do-it-yourself platform, um, I quickly realized that there were instances where people quickly needed websites. And so I was able to deliver websites using the Squarespace platform for a bit. And now that I was like dependent on finding clients on the internet, marketing myself and learning how to create some kind of internet business became my number one priority. And so for the past 10 years, I've just been fully immersed in refining and defining that process of what it takes to create an online business, to grow it, to scale it, to market. And that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, and what struck me the most and what it really resonates is when you were talking about how you knew you had this interest or this affinity for web design or just for creating things. And when you started, it wasn't really about making money, or you weren't sure how to actually turn it into something that would be financially viable at all. It was um, about the exploration. It was about the adventure. It was about really kind of figuring it out and tinkering. And it wasn't until there was some kind of extreme, extenuating circumstance that kind of really pushed you in that direction. And I can say, you know, I've definitely had situations where, creativity for me was something that, I was working a 9 to 5 job, but I would find myself tinkering with websites on the side and getting really immersed and literally losing hours of productivity time
Mhm.
building websites because I was just so interested in it and I enjoyed it and I wasn't necessarily making money doing it, but it was just something that was fun and that really kind of it got me. It really like it made me want to immerse myself in learning more about it. And I tell everyone, if you find that one thing that gets you excited, that gets you going, that you almost can't pull yourself away from, take note of that. And a lot of times it can be tough if you're working a 9 to 5 to pursue these other passions because it does feel like a loss of productivity, or it feels like, oh, that's this thing that I'm wasting time on that maybe I shouldn't be doing. And I do remember starting taking my business full time, and I remember doing these projects and having these moments where I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'm wasting so much time." And then remembering like, "No, actually, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing." And having a different feeling about that of like actually being able to enjoy my work. It was different. Um and when you were talking about kind of being pushed in a direction by life, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this about um, what to do when maybe you want to pursue a creative passion, but you're not quite sure if that's the route you should take because maybe it doesn't feel like the most stable or the most wise decision. But sometimes that's what we need is sometimes we need like this push to push us in the right direction. And it can feel really scary sometimes, right? When we're stepping into the unknown and we're not sure of how is it going to play out? Like, is this even going to work? Especially when you have children, right? And you have a family that you have to take care of. And it's like, well, I have this pressing need of putting food on the table and taking care of my family and making sure there's a roof over our heads and making sure we're safe. But at the same time, like needing to have that time to be able to explore and to be able to build and be able to create the future that you want. So, thank you for sharing your story. It's very inspiring. With that being said, I want to definitely find out where you are in the world. So, we're not in Florida.
Mhm.
Are you somewhere on the West Coast?
No, I'm not in America.
Okay, well, that was going to be my next question. So thank you. By the way, I have a strategy for this show.
Okay.
Um, it's, the seven continents. So there are seven continents, start to at least narrow them down from there. So if we're not in the United States, it's very possible that I may know uh, where we are. So where you said not in North America. So that includes Canada and Mexico.
Hmm.
Can you
Can
give
I
me an
guess?
I can tell. You're gonna make me work for this one. Can you give me another clue about this place?
Yeah. So the other clue is the star. There's a star. I didn't mention that the first time, but I think it's a significant clue. It's a black star. So
Okay,
if you add it up, so you add up the black star, the freedom, the justice, and 1957, it equals something. A place.
okay. Well, I was definitely feeling Black History vibes from this, but now I feel like I can really pursue that. Thank you. I I have an idea of where we
Okay.
may be. Okay,
All
well
right.
now it's your turn.
Are we in Scotland?
Oh my goodness, we are off the coast of Scotland.
Okay.
How do you know this? I
Well,
gave you an easy clue.
I guess maybe the clue is too easy for me. Um, there are but so many of these kind of lighthouses that have survived this long.
Yeah.
And so the Bell Rock lighthouse would probably be the one.
This is the Bell Rock Lighthouse. Oh my
Hey.
yes. So I chose this place because it is an engineering wonder of the world.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, you have a history as a mechanical engineer. Um, I was just going to tell the next clue that I was going to have because I thought it was pretty interesting is that
Okay,
the
yeah, yeah.
actual official animal of Scotland is the unicorn. But Bell Rock is more than 200 years old. And it is situated in the North Sea and it's perched on top of Bell Rock. So it's actually named after its location. Um, so the Bell Rock house was built by a Scottish engineer whose name is Robert Stevenson between 1807 and 1810.
Oh,
And it's the oldest surviving sea wash lighthouse in the whole world. It took 2 years to uh, it took 2 years to build it to 6 feet. But we already know that this tower stands up to 35 meters high. So very tall, very strong structure. But yeah, so you have guessed where I am correctly.
thanks.
Well, I guess that just leaves me guessing. But before we get into the next guess, let's move on to our next question. So, prior to this conversation, you stated every year I'm going through a process of reinvention and finding a new way of expression. Any tips for how young professionals can go about reinventing themselves and finding new ways of expression in their lives?
Hmm. Hmm. This is a really good question. And one thing that I've used that has kind of somewhat anchored me is when I was still working as an engineer, I created this ideal day scenario for myself where there's only but so many hours in a day, and so it's like this exercise of creating like the perfect average day. So if you were to just take your average day, like what would that look like ideally? And I wrote it down, I created it, and since then I went from having no children when I wrote that down to now having three children. My life has changed and transformed, but that day, that ideal day, has pretty much stayed consistent. And so I share that because despite the, whatever changes or transformations, there's always a part of us that is going to remain consistent throughout. And usually we can find that part if we go backwards a little bit, because it's the part that's always been there. And if we can figure out how to build around that part and kind of like let that guide us and lead us, it will open up things. So for me, you mentioned engineer. I'm When it comes to the digital realm, I'm a search engineer, right? So I'm always searching the internet, and it doesn't take me long to find what I'm looking for usually. And I'm always willing to go the extra distance to find something that maybe hasn't been found yet or is tricky for other people to find. And so that was true for the 10-year-old, and it's true for me now, uh 20, I don't know how many years later, 27 years later, where I'm still searching the internet. The internet has grown up, I've grown up, but I'm still searching it. But I search it with the awareness that whatever I'm looking for, I'm not the only one.
Hmm.
And if I can't find something, I'm also not the only one. And so that helps me to figure out, well, where's their potential demand? And the potential demand is always coming after me. It's always not too far behind. And so I've kind of built my internet career and business around that running principle of looking for things on the internet, not being able to find them, and then creating something so that the next person who looks can find it. And I know that wasn't the direct question, but it's the part for me that has remained consistent and true that I've been able to build around.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about really sitting down and thinking about, well, what does an ideal day look like? And because a lot of times when we think about, and there's a question going to be that we ask all of our guests, which is how do you define the success? But when we think about success and we think about what we want in our lives, a lot of times we're thinking about how much money we want, or we're thinking about what kind of car we want to drive, or we're thinking about like what material things that we want to fill up our space. But this idea of thinking about like how do I want to live, like what do I want my day to look like, right? Like how do I want to wake up, how do I want to go to sleep, how do I want to live, like what experiences do I want to have, is much more fulfilling, right, when you actually get there. So thank you, that's a really helpful way of orienting and thinking about how to invent our lives. Okay, so I'm not going to cheat on this one. I'm not going to Google, not yet. Okay, so we are going to use Google at some point, possibly, maybe. But I'm going to guess that we are in Africa.
Yeah, we're in Africa. Dun, dun, dun,
Yes.
dun, dun.
Okay, so give me another clue about this
Okay.
place.
Um. Hmm. So, it's a country that became independent. Maybe around 50, 60 years ago.
Okay.
Um. So I mean, that's not really a good clue because there's a lot of countries. Um. All right, I'll just We'll say it's in West Africa. How about that? So you can
Oh,
narrow it
West
down a little
Africa.
bit. Yeah,
Okay.
West Africa.
Okay. I mean, Africa is very large, and there are a lot of countries in Africa, a lot of tribes in Africa, a lot of languages, many, many languages that are spoken in Africa. And so, yeah, that helps to narrow it down to West Africa. Wonderful. Cool. All right. Well, let's move on to our next question. What would you give? What advice would you give to a young professional who maybe they have a vision for what's possible in their careers, but they're not quite sure where to start, and they question if what they want is even realistic?
Hmm. So for me, it's really difficult to not have a model of some sort. So finding individuals who have accomplished what this vision is that you have, and trying to make contact with them.
Hmm.
It's like simple as that. And I've done this recently, even now, as I map out my next 10, 20, 30 years, looking at the kind of fields that I want to get into and reading books and then reaching out to the authors of those books, reaching out to the individuals who just done the thing. And if you can't find anyone who's done the thing, then you're in a privileged place because it means you're likely to be first of some sort. But there's always going to be some precedent of some sort. So you want to find the precedent and follow it, and try to get as much as you can from it, because that's kind of like your bridge, right, to get to where you want to go, is this individual or a set of individuals who can, or who represent your vision, and can kind of help bring you there.
All right. Yeah. Um, so what I hear you saying is really take a look at kind of the planning playing field, or where you are, or like the path that you want to be on, and find someone who is further along that path than you are, who you can learn from. And I struggle with this, I'll be honest, with the idea of like having an idol, or having someone that I look up to, or someone that I can emulate or follow behind. Typically, I I might see folks who seem like they're doing what I'm doing, or I know that those people exist, but I often come from the standpoint of like wanting to create it for myself and figure it out on my own, which isn't always healthy, right? Like I think it is helpful to have a guide, or have a guiding light, so to speak. So I'm going to ask a follow up question for you of like, how do you find these people? Like, if I'm saying, okay, I want to be a digital marketing expert, or I want to be, or I want to invent something that can change the world, where do I go to find these people, and how do I make contact with them? Because it seems like those kind of people feel like maybe they will be out of reach for me.
Yeah, so they should be out of reach initially. If they're within reach, then it's probably not the right people. Um, and to touch on your point about like, so the purpose of the model isn't an idol, and so the difference between a model is and an idol is, with the idol we surrender a part of ourselves, and that's the part that you don't want to give up. That's the unique you. But with a model, it gives us a representation of ourselves. So one, with a model, we can see kind of like a schematic of a version, right? And so this is a future version of ourselves. It's not us. But it's distant, meaning it requires time for us to get there. That's the
Mm,
important part, and that's why it can't be necessarily a pair, because there's not enough time distance between where your peers are and where you are. So they have to be like a veteran, like someone who's, because they're going to have a vantage point and a perspective that you won't be able to get anywhere else. And so your follow up about how do you find these people, they're out of reach, so forth. You'd be surprised, at how easy the people who are out of reach are to reach. And the reason
mm,
for that is because there's usually so much like BS, so much like noise, that it's easy for them to pick up signal, meaning it's easy for them to pick up a genuine, someone who's reaching out from a genuine place. Like my LinkedIn inbox is full of, just like spam messages, but
yep.
the one or the two real people who reach out, they get a real response. It never fails. My other inboxes might be a little different, but at the same time, there's always a feeling of like, oh, this person is where I've been before, so therefore, it's a natural process to want to pour back. And how do you find, it's like, I like to follow my consumption. So whatever I'm a consumer of, whatever I like to consume, I seek out the producers of those things. So I read the credits. I look at the liner notes. I look to find like, it's not, they're usually the people you're looking for aren't like in your face either. And I think that might be where some people can get lost with the idol thing, is where, usually the people who command a lot of visual attention, um that might those might not necessarily be the models for who you want to model, but it could be. I don't know, it's up to you. I had to let go of my idols in order to grow.
Dang, that's
um
deep.
but but yeah, that's how I go about finding people. And so, like, on a very practical level, um like finding company emails, usually there's some kind of like name format. So it might be like first name,
Mhm.
first letter, last name, or both, or first name dot last name. And generally, you can do a couple Google searches to figure out how the company structures their emails, and then you can reach out directly to the VP of whatever. That's typically the path I like to take, or the CEO, or whoever's the, you want to just go to the top of whatever, wherever you want to be, and you'll be surprised, that you'll get what you're looking for.
Omari, I'm taking notes, okay? Because you're giving us uh some real tips here. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about how the people that we idol tend to be the people that we see the most. But the thing to remember is that typically those folks have teams behind them, right? So
Yeah.
and that's literally what you're talking about. You're like, look at the credits, look at who's actually doing the production of it, right? Like look at the actual breakdown. And then go from there. So thank you. That is really helpful. Well, we are in Africa and we are in a country that is recently liberated. We are in a West African country. Um, I'm going to be honest and say that I don't know a ton about my African geography. Um, so, I mean, I do know Ghana, I do know Nigeria, but I'm going to go and I'm going to consult Google on this one.
Yay.
um,
And I want to know what you searched too.
I just put in West Africa. I just put in West Africa.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
No,
I'm looking
okay.
at a map. I'm looking at a map. I mean, there are lots of countries on the west of Africa. I'm gonna go ahead and say, well, I guess that's more Southern Africa is Cape Town. I'm gonna guess that we're in Nigeria.
And I'm googling it too.
Well, I mean, okay, so one down, a few more to go. Tell me, give me a little bit more. Give like a
Oh,
little bit more about this place.
okay. All right. Oh yeah. Okay. I'll tell you some more. Cause now I know. Now I know what it's called. I didn't even know what it was called until I googled it myself. Um. So it was this monument was commissioned by Kwame Nkrumah to indicate the country's supreme power to control its own affairs.
Oh, okay. So, can I ask a question? So, was this during the time? Is that date the year that this country became independent?
I don't know actually. I
Okay,
don't know.
so I'm wondering if there's a parallel between the structure being built and the country's independence, or if that's separate.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it's. I think another name for it is Independence Arch, maybe. Yeah, Independence Arch.
Okay. So that's the other name for the place. Well, you just told me the name of the place.
I gave you another name. I didn't give you the main name.
The main. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we have more questions. We have
Yeah.
more questions. Um, so can you describe a moment in your career when you had an idea of what was possible for your life, but you weren't quite sure how to get there? What was the
Yeah.
situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome?
Yeah. I was in my cubicle, trying to figure out how I was gonna make a living outside of my cubicle, and I had no idea how that would be. The only ways I knew how to make money were to um, kind of hustle somehow, and my hustles were creative hustles. So taking photos at events and um, trying to create content for startup brands. Those were my hustles, and but what I learned was that I would need more than a hustle, and that I would need an asset, and I would need to learn how to create an asset that would generate income and allow me to generate income so that I would have time to do the things that I wanted to do on my ideal perfect day. And so that like that transition from, okay, I've got these freelance skills that I can do, to this isn't enough, or this isn't affording me the time that I imagine for myself, or this isn't giving me the freedom that I imagine. And so in order to get that freedom, I had to create in a way where um, many people could benefit from whatever it is that I was doing. So what I mean by that is, no matter what I'm pursuing, I'm always going to run into a challenge. I'm always going to run into a problem. And there's a good chance that I might need to search the internet for some kind of tips or help or guidance to solve that problem. And whenever I do that, I look to turn around and create something so that the next person with that same problem or that same challenge can find what they couldn't find previously. And so that's how I create what I call these little content assets. It could be a YouTube video, it could be a blog post, it could be it it just sits somewhere, but it's somewhere that you can search and find. And over time, these content assets, they compound, and hundreds and thousands of people then find what you were once looking for. And so that process for me has been the bridge between, okay, I'm creative, I'm a freelancer, I like to do stuff, but I don't necessarily want to be doing stuff for people every day. That I it took me about 5 years of freelancing kind of to realize, wait, this the reason this isn't working for me is because I'm just repeating the pattern of employment, of like my employment mindset and what I was doing on the job. And so I had to like let that go and shift gears and do like a complete 180 and really go cold turkey. But it wasn't until I couldn't go cold turkey on that kind of a direct service work until I had created enough of these content assets to sustain me. So I know that was a long answer and the question was a little shorter, but that was a time where I didn't know how I was going to create this kind of a lifestyle for myself where I could create what I wanted to create, and I thought that I would have to do that for people, and so I was doing it for people, and it would get uncomfortable because just too many reasons to get into for this answer, but I could expand. And that discomfort again led me to realize there's another way, and the other way is locked up in you taking your problems and transmuting them into solutions for others.
That's wonderful. And um, what you were saying about we have another episode on the show, a previous episode that we did with Deanna Brooks, and we talk about wealth creation and creating wealth. And we talk a lot about how difficult it can be from going from a structured 9 to 5 or a structured work environment into entrepreneurship and shifting to this idea of creating wealth because we're so trained to attach our hours to how much money we make, like our
Hmm.
effort to our money, and how difficult it can be to actually break out of that cycle of feeling like I have to be doing something all the time in order to earn my fare, right?
Hmm.
And so hearing you talk about that, of that, it almost felt like there was this mindset shift that needed to happen for you to be able to find this new path. And a lot of it happened by experimentation, about just starting, about just creating something, and then seeing that effort compound, and then seeing the path and the path naturally forming for you. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that like you're never alone, right? Like especially when it seems like whatever you're going through or the vision that you have, like no one around you gets it, no one around you can see it or understand. That might be true for a moment, but you're not the only one in the 8 billion people on the planet who has this vision or who has had this vision or who will have this vision. You're not the only one going through any kind of a struggle or hardship or whatever it is. And so remembering that everyone needs something, like we all have these same needs in the middle of these situations. So as you find what you need, as you take a step and you get what you need, it is imperative that you figure out a way to give what you have received to as many other people as can benefit. It might be one in the beginning or two or three, but the power of the internet is that we have the ability to give more than than is in front of us in the moment. And so a year from now, you know someone could be watching this video and it means something. It's like the perfect video at the right time, right? And it's because I can't move forward where I am until I have let go of what I have gained.
Mhm.
Jeez, on peace, you're gonna get me going into my bag now.
Look, I'm starting to get goosebumps too. Okay. Um Man, so many thoughts, so many things came up for me as you were talking. Um but one thing, is trying to figure out where in the world you are. So,
I'm not giving no more clues. You gotta Google it.
okay, so we're in West Africa.
It's one Google away.
It is, but I want to give my very best. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying?
Okay.
Um, so are we okay? So I just one clue. How I guess that we were in Nigeria. How close to Nigeria are we? Am I
You
hot?
yeah, you
Warm?
couple yeah, you warm, you couple
I'm
countries away.
warm.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
okay, okay. A
yeah.
couple corner country. Okay.
Yeah.
Are we in Ghana?
We are in Ghana. We're in Ghana. Yes.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so we are in Ghana, which was
Mhm.
actually one of my first guesses. Or not first guesses. I said it, you know.
Yeah, it's like a
Okay,
passing
so
guess.
we're in Ghana. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll continue on the next question.
I can give a story behind it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I put in my resignation. It's February 14th or February 11th, 2014, and a friend of mine is like, "I'm going to Ghana next month, and I want you to come." And I'm like, "All right, I'm coming." I just quit my job. Like it's the perfect place to go. Like back to Africa. I'm going from the corporate plantation back to Ghana, and it was a very redemptive experience, a very redemptive trip. And so there's a lot of symbolism here, the black star, the freedom, the justice. And so it represents a certain autonomy and a certain self-governance that when I was making this transition, I had to reach on to something outside of myself, something bigger than myself, things that were bigger than myself that representations of this journey that I was on, which was physical and spiritual in a sense where in in my realm, right, there's no when I left the plantation, no one chased me, right? There was no hounds on my tail. No one cared. But in my in my spiritual realm, there was still, these demons chasing me of like, oh, you have to do things a certain way, or you're not going to be received unless conform a certain way. And so this was like a certain kind of rebellion, but a healthy one, a conscious one, and an intentional one, that where the purpose was to recreate. So um, the process is like you have to break certain things down, and then you can reassess the structure and rebuild according to your own design. So I was trying to get away from structures, but ultimately, in order to be free, I had to erect my own structure.
Dang. Woo!
That was fired. That last
That
one was
was
fired.
fire. That was fire. That was fire. Okay, but listen. So the reason why that resonates so deeply with me is because I tell this story quite often on this show. Is I struggled with anxiety. I didn't even have a name for it
Mhm.
until it flared up in a corporate setting. I ended up going into a therapy program, was diagnosed, everything, and when I left corporate America, I still felt that anxious energy, even though I wasn't in this space. And it was exactly what you were saying. It was this feeling like I need to do things a certain way. It
Mhm.
was this feeling like um, I was still beholden mentally to the structure that did no longer actually existed in my physical realm.
Mhm.
um I felt like whenever I was resting that I was wasting time, and it took a toll. It took probably 2 years for me to fully come out of that space of this anxious energy, of this almost like this cloud that was hanging over me. And um I also realized that in place of that structure that I needed to create this new system, right? And but it felt different. It felt empowering to think that, wow, I can create a system for myself. And
Mhm.
I was previously existing in this system from someone else's mind that someone else created, right? And I remember I remember when I worked at an automotive company and I took a trip to Ohio and to one of the manufacturing plants. And I remember walking in the plant, and the plant is huge, it's big, literally employs, you know, thousands of people, and seeing all these people on the line, seeing all of these, seeing literally like liquid metal like boiling being poured, and seeing different molds and people making pistons and shapes, and sitting there in awe and being like, man, like this this experience that I'm having came from the minds of one or two people.
Mhm.
And if one or two people can create this, like, what can I create? All the time that I pour into coming into work every single day and creating, if I were to take that same energy
Mhm.
and applied it to my own ideas, what could I create? And that was the wake up call for me. And so hearing you talk about that, talking about there being like this structure, and even though you weren't there anymore, breaking free from that, and then taking this new steps to build a new structure around yourself, to build a new system, to create a new way of being. Um, that is what really, really spoke to me. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So we're almost here, um, at the end of the show, but we have a couple more questions for you. Are you okay with that?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So here's a statistic from the National Endowment of the Arts. Artists are 3.6 times more likely to be self employed, and 63% of all artists hold a bachelor's degree or higher. What are your thoughts on that?
Sounds like a reasonable statistic to me. I think where it leads me to think, or what's kind of been on my mind, is, um, a lot of artists struggle with the business side of their art, and what it means to either commercialize it or to um, monetize it, whatever the language you want to use. But I think um, that could be really intimidating. But I think what the internet allows us to do and frees us up to do is to get creative in, first of all, how we learn. So, everything that I've learned in the past decade, I've learned it through the internet. I haven't gone to a physical building and sat in a class. But I've created my own classes. I've created my own curriculums and my own ways to learn what I need to learn, so that I can gain the skills to still be a creator, still be an artist. But you know, a lot of artists, you have your job, and I was this artist. You have your job, and then your superhero kind of creative self outside of work, and your job pays for your ability to be creative out of work. And occasionally it'll get to that point where it's like, oh, I wish I could be this all the time, I wish I could be creative all the time, blah blah, but you're like, oh, I got to go to work, otherwise it can't happen anymore. And so I still went through that experience, as a solopreneur, where it was like, okay, I maybe it's not a job, but I need to still create something that is going to generate income while I have this creative freedom, right? I don't want to necessarily sell my creativity to the highest bidder, but I still need to transmute something. And so, for me, the mirror or the bridge between like the engineer in mind and the market in mind is this like transmuting of experiences where, um, I'm always looking like, or asking the question of who else can benefit, right? No matter what it is, like who else can benefit? Who else can benefit? And if you ask yourself that question often enough, you will start to find the people who could benefit from whatever you're pondering. And that relationship is a business relationship. Whenever you have a group of people who are benefiting from something that you have to offer, you have a business. And so artists often get lost in themselves and lost in their own process, and you know how they can benefit from whatever it is. Like, how can I benefit? But when you turn that question around into who else, then your canvas becomes an asset. Your camera become everything becomes a potential asset where someone else could benefit.
And thank you for sharing that new way of thinking, because here's something that we hear often. There's something that I love to do. There's something that I really enjoy, but I don't want to sell it because if I sell it, then I'm not going to enjoy it as much.
Hmm.
And a lot of what's at the core of that way of thinking is because we're asking ourselves the wrong question. A lot of times we're asking, how can I make money off of this thing that I enjoy or this thing that I think I'm good at, versus
Hmm.
asking the question that you're posing, which is who else can benefit,
Hmm.
right? Um, and I think that's such a bold distinction, because that question of who else can benefit leads us in another direction. It leads us to more collaboration, more creativity. It leads us to lifting other people up. It leads us to more connection, right? And all of these things, we're now creating an ecosystem to now support this vision, right? And we're bringing other people in who can help to amplify that vision, right? The other thing, and this actually makes me think, and it makes me think a lot about what we're doing here today about the Conscious Career Network, is I got to this point where I had to realize that um, coming on the show every single week and interviewing people is it's not really about me at all. I had to detach myself from the thing that I think that I'm creating, because at some point it starts to have a life of its own. It starts to have a mind of its own, right? It starts to grow, and as it morphs, it becomes its own entity, and I'm no longer the creator of that entity. I am merely the shepherd. I am the steward of it. And now I have this responsibility to help it reach as many people as possible, so that it can help as many people as possible, so it can provide as much value as possible. And the more that I can detach myself and what I think I'm getting out of it, or my own ego, from the creative process, the more liberty and the more freedom the idea has to expand and grow, right?
Hmm.
And so um that's an intentional step that I think we need to take, because a lot of times we are afraid. And I've had conversations about people who are like, "Oh, I love to do this thing." And I'm like, "Well, why not do it?" "Oh, well, because I'm afraid that if I do it full time and if I, put a price tag on it, I'm not going to love it. It's going to kill it." And it's like, well, that's because we're asking the wrong question. Right. And maybe we just need a little bit of a shift in the way that we're thinking about that thing to inspire us to take the action. And you never know, you might start doing it and like, wow, I love this. And not only, and this brings me to ikigai, right? Which is when you're doing something that you love, that you're good at, that you can be paid for, and that's good for the world, right? And feeling like it's okay to be paid to do something that I really enjoy, I think is also an emotional hurdle that sometimes we have to uh, get over, because we have this connection or this idea that I have to be in suffering in order to really get paid for it, right? Because that's what we've been trained to believe in, maybe a 9 to 5 job that we don't enjoy. And I'm not saying that all 9 to 5 jobs aren't enjoyable. I love my part-time job. I really do. I really actually enjoy it. But um like a lot of times we're trained to believe that if we're enjoying it, then that's probably, and we're getting paid, then it doesn't exist or it's not real. How can, and I used to believe that. I used to believe that there's no way that I'll be able to find a job that I enjoy and get paid well for. Like that doesn't exist. But I'm here to tell anyone who's listening to this that it definitely exists. And it's probably something that exists within your own imagination that you can go out and you can create for yourself. Cool. All right, so you are at the Black Star Gate
Yes, ma'am.
because that is a Black Star.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you've already kind of given us the background about this place, but can you tell us a little bit more about, like, tell us what the significance of the Black Star Gate is?
Black Star. Black Star. Yeah. So the Black Star Line was about 100 years ago. There's a man named Marcus Garvey. He was Jamaican, and um, he he had a vision for a more united black world. Right. Typically, people talk about black community or black America, but he had a vision for a more united diaspora. And at the time, he started a commercial shipping line called Black Star Line. And so Black Star Line became a symbol for commercial enterprise to go along with this what do you call it? Self reliant philosophy that Garvey had adopted. Oh, this is the Black History part of the lesson. Okay. So I didn't realize. Okay. So, yes. um, so later on, when these African nations were becoming independent from the colonial powers, they got a lot of inspiration from the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. And so a lot of his imprint ended up in, the monuments. And so that's the reason for the Black Star. And for my own career path journey, this philosophy of self reliance and what it means to be self reliant within the system, or within wherever you're at. How do you create that kind of independence and autonomy?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that piece of history with us. And it's such a really great reminder of um, what it means to actually gain independence and to gain autonomy. All right, cool. Well, we're here near the end of our show, but I can't allow you to leave without asking you a question that we ask every guest that comes on this show. How would you describe success?
Um, Success is being able to do what you want to do, and enjoy it in the process. That's my simplest definition of success.
That was a really quick definition.
I know.
I love that. um, so success is being able to do what you enjoy do and love to do what you enjoy doing and love it in the process. Thank you for sharing that with me and with us, and for coming on the show, sharing your wisdom. It's been such a pleasure listening to you and learning from you. And I know that our guests will get as much out of it as I have. Like I said, I was definitely taking notes, and I look forward to watching this replay. And, having the courage maybe to reach out to some people at the top of the ladder that maybe I didn't have the courage to reach out to before. Definitely going to be taking a look at the credits and going boldly and creating and inventing the life and the future that I want for myself. And I encourage everyone else to also proceed boldly with confidence. With that being said, how can people find you and learn more about you?
You can find me at omariharabin.com or Omari Harabin on any of the places where you find people.
And I know that you're also a podcaster. Do you have any other projects coming up? Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, you can check me out on the unofficial Squarespace Entrepreneur podcast. Um, and yeah, that's about it for now, I think.
Awesome. Well, until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.